the key reason you're interested in podcasting with campus ministry. Would that work okay? Deborah, would you like to go first?
Sure. Hi, I'm Deborah Juarez. I am work with the University of Wyoming in Laramie, Wyoming. And I have students that have asked me, oh, do you do podcasts? Do you have this? And I have no idea, but I listen to them a lot. So yes, I'm excited about this. So thank you.
Great. And we'll talk about strategic listening to podcasts as well as strategic creation of podcasts too. Okay.
Cool.
And you might hear some of my comrades today. They're with me, and to keep them quiet, I had to take them to the playground. So we're on our way back to the playground. Who else do we have? Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're thinking about for podcasting?
Yeah, hey, I'm Mark Forrester. I'm at GBHEM in the Collegiate Ministry Office, but with 27 years of campus ministry experience of one kind or another. I am a big podcast listener, do that a lot. And I've actually been on a podcast. A good friend of mine started a podcast about 7 years ago, actually. And it's very successful, but it has nothing to do with religion or social ethics. It's a hobby. It's a hobby podcast that we do on beer. I'm a brewer. I'm a hobby brewer. So it's a beer podcast, but we have monetized it and it has done very well. But I just want to listen in on this to see maybe what I can do out of my own little shop.
Thanks, Mark. And I think learning from all kinds of podcasts is the way that I got started as well. So I think that's very smart. I just noticed how many people are in the room. So why don't I just open it to any particular hopes for the conversation? If you don't have any particular ones, then we can just kind of get started. But let me open it. Is there anybody else who would just like to say who you are and one particular interest you have?
Yeah, my name's Corey Moses, and I am the Wesley director at Tarleton State University in Central Texas. And our university has what they call a free lunch program, where there are 4 different campus ministries on campus of the 12 that have a free lunch one day a week, and ours is one of them. And we get churches to provide the meal, and that any student or faculty can come, and we feed about 150 to 190 students every Monday. Well, as of 2020, our university we won't be able to do that free lunch this semester. And so this podcast thing is really timely because we kind of were brainstorming about a way to fill that slot on Mondays at noon. And we're kind of looking at starting a podcast / Facebook Live video session kind of thing each week. And so I'm just kind of I've listened to a lot of podcasts, but never actually done one before. So I'm kind of hitting ground zero with it. So
thanks. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of us are facing that same reality. We are now not allowed to have really cool big gatherings anymore. So how do we use this as a tool to bridge that gap? Yeah. Anybody else?
Well, our campus ministry, the Downtowners Campus Ministry, reaches out to 5 different downtown universities, and we are accustomed to the missional outreach. And so, as of these days, as you know, our outreach has been texting, email, phone conversations, Zoom, and actually a lot of it's been soul felt and very amazing. But we need to really get more out there. And as we've been accustomed to gathering students of all different backgrounds, faith expressions, we want those stories of faith to keep the students going. They're very discouraged. They're very sad in these virtual classes. They miss their professors, they miss each other. And I thought podcast, if you can teach us how, would be a great way to do this. keep our souls felt.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's really we've been continuing to try to work on is how is this not just a show that is just kind of consumed by someone in the same way that maybe a pre-recorded lecture for a class that you have to take, right? So how can you turn it into something that is kind of relational building? Well, I appreciate all of that, friends, and we're going to do our best to help you get to where you need to be. Let me tell you a little bit about what we have done at Motor City Wesley and how it's helped us recently. 2 years ago, one of our students, Sam Koba, came to me and said, hey, he comes from a church here in Detroit, Second Grace United Methodist Church, that has a lot of folks who have immigrated from Liberia. And so his family is Liberian, and he took his first trip back to Liberia. And it was after that he got back to Detroit, and he said, there's so many young people doing so many cool things over there through the church and for their communities. And I have to think that there are folks around Detroit that have the same cool stories, and I would love to tell those stories. And so he created Uproar, which became our kind of once or twice a month feature of young people doing cool things because of their faith around Detroit, out in the world, whoever we could get. And as this kind of in a producer role as a campus minister, I thought, let me take care of some of the technical things. Let me take care of any hosting or equipment costs that we need to put into this, because you're going to be providing this very public facing thing that we can share. And for a campus ministry that's still trying to figure out how do we help everybody know who we are, that's a great resource for us. And we really thank you, Sam, for having that thought. Before COVID this year, we added these, thinking to any of us that have the kind of free meal thing happening. We added the piece where we would gather for free lunch in the student center, and we would host a conversation for the Uproar podcast. And then we had kind of best of both worlds. So we had an in-person gathering, usually pizza, but we also had this in-depth conversation with folks from mission agencies, G's Magazine, all sorts of guests coming through to do that. And I was really excited because it felt like just two things coming together that really fed each other well. An in-person gathering that also provided us a thing that we could share out in the world. And then COVID hit. And I thought, well, that's all over, right? We can't get together to have these conversations. We can't, to record them. And I guess we'll just fold up and, try to do something else. But it was our partners that said, we'd still love to do in-depth conversations if you were interested in trying. And so we turned to a kind of twofold process for creating this podcast content. First is a live, usually live, or now, you can also kind of multicast to YouTube and Facebook and pull in comments from each of those with 3 or 4 conversation partners, usually a panel on a particular topic. And that goes out live, unedited for anybody to participate. And then we pull those files down from those various platforms, or we use a program on Mac called Ecamm Live or StreamYard, all these different platforms that I'll put into the resources that we put up on the umcma.org website for you to click on, that can record the podcast, the live stream as you make it. And then you can grab that file and edit it into the piece that has cool bumpers and goes into your podcast feed and has your little thank yous for your top patrons or whatever it is you need to add to it a little later. So what that meant was on our live stream, we had, we had one particular week where we had really good guests that a lot of people wanted to hear from. So we went from having 20 or 30 people in the student center eating pizza and listening to folks to literally 500 viewers. And I thought, oh, what have we been missing because we haven't, let ourselves make the best use of this particular tool that's at our fingertips, because we've had some notion that if it isn't in the same room, then it isn't a thing. So it kind of made me rethink lots of pieces. So now we have a kind of an ongoing effort to have one or two of these kind of live stream and then podcast episode things. In the summer, we change and we do kind of a series each summer where we're interviewing important, connected pastoral leaders across Metro Detroit, usually United Methodist, just because that's most of our connection points are, but we're not exclusive to that. But we're doing interviews for a series each summer called Hear From There. So while during the school year, it's how many students can we get on these live feeds, and how is it encouraging them in their own conspiracies of goodness, which is another kind of core piece of what we do. But during the summer, we try to say, how do we reconnect back with the broader church? And so we do a series of 4 to 5 to 6 interviews with pastors who come from possibly churches where we've got some students coming out of onto our campuses, and just ask them, as a young adult, what were the formational events that kind of sent you in the direction that you're coming to? And that's been a nice back and forth between school year and summertime, speaking toward a couple of our different constituencies. And then lastly, what I just want to mention is, I think it's really important to just recognize that the podcast world typically works best when you're using your place out there, like on iTunes lists and things, as its own kind of relationship building. And so we try to make sure that we are followers and fans and subscribers to podcasts that will that other people are producing, that we think will help students in their missional living. And to be quite honest, there are some really great podcasts right now being produced by pretty much formerly Christians who are still interested in spiritual matters and who tend to swear a lot. And it's real easy for me to get students to listen to podcasts like that. If you throw a couple swears in there and you're not afraid to talk to and about people who grew up in the church, but have left, and they're going to talk about why they did, there's a lot to learn there. And I think it speaks to some of the kind of place that many of our students are in. I think it also communicates to the broader student body that we are not trying to give them content for a Christian subculture, but we really are trying to encourage students in a grown-up kind of faith. So we've been listening and sharing podcasts from a couple of, one is Good Christian Fun, and the other is Who's Your God, currently. And just a second, guys. We've been just developing a conversation guides that can go along with those and can inform some Zoom call, small group type gatherings of our students. So if they're particular fans of Amy Miller's brand of comedy, maybe they'll listen to Who's Your God? And here's the 4 or 5, questions about the heteropatriarchy and the church, and what do we do about that? And oh, by the way, here's one scripture that we thought might help us think through this particular topic that was explored on this other podcast. So all that to say, podcasts have gone from being kind of a brochure about what we actually do to being the actual way that we gather. And it's kind of the method by which we're developing resources for our own small group ministries based off of other podcasts. And those resources are very easily shared with partner churches. Hey, if you're partner with us, if you're a monthly donor, you get access to these conversation guides to work with your own young adult group wherever you are. And that's kind of what we're doing. Briefly on kind of the technical side of things, I would say there's lots of different ways that you can get your podcast feed out there. One of the simplest ones, if you're starting off from scratch, is to go to anchor.fm. It's got all sorts of resources in there. It's primarily, I think, is designed for kind of use on your cell phone. It's got a way to call people that you want to interview. It's got you can add a promotional segment if you want to do a commercial for anchor.fm. They'll give you like 3 cents for 100 listens or something. I think we've done 10 or 12 episodes on there, and we've got a whole $1 in our wallet. So I wouldn't say that's the most important thing, but it's a great way to get started. They handle all of the kind of sending your podcast feed out to Apple Podcasts and Google and Stitcher and Spotify and all those other places, and provide things like an embeddable player that you can grab the code for and put on your website. So anchor.fm is a great place to start. If you are doing a little bit of thinking about what's your best website platform, we have found that Squarespace is it has a lot of features in it to fairly easily develop a podcast feed on Squarespace. It's as simple as attaching an audio file to a blog post, and then all of a sudden you're able to take that, and you have to do a little bit more manual work getting that feed out to Apple Podcasts and things like that, but it's a little more robust, and it's a little bit more, if your website is on Squarespace or a similar kind of platform like that, you have a little bit more ownership of how it looks and things like that. So I would say if you're moving up to the next level, go to Squarespace, or at least consider it if you haven't yet. And then lastly, kind of mics and interface boxes. We get along quite nicely with whatever church microphones you can get your hands on. I mean, I don't think anything super special has to happen that way, but we have been helped by a thing called the Scarlett 6i6. And there's lots of different things that can take a microphone signal and allow you to plug it into your computer and use that to record. But that's just the one brand that we have had some good success with. I'm gonna stop there and let a couple of questions pop through. I think it's just kind of a popcorn thing. Jump on and ask your question if you have it, and I'll see what we can do to talk further about that.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, Carl. So is it necessary to spend a lot of money on equipment up front, or will like the onboard microphone on a phone or laptop be useful? And then if you could spend some time kind of talking about like the prep work and the post work, preparing for an episode and then posting an episode, kind of like what that looks like for you in a week for just posting and producing an episode. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. First off, yeah, don't think that you have to wait around for the right equipment to do this. If you have anchor.fm on your phone, I've actually got better audio just speaking into my phone than I have sometimes with the whole, large diaphragm condenser mic and plug it into the computer. So I would say definitely don't wait. Something as simple as grabbing an interview on a voice memo app on your phone, I think will work wonderfully for what you need. So
man, I was hoping that's what you'd say.
Yeah, definitely. Because the more important thing is the conversation, right? And I don't think anybody expects us as campus ministries to have, cinema quality sound. I think we should have some, use your own ear. If you've recorded it in a way that is just super annoying and you wouldn't want to listen to it for 20 minutes, then maybe try to find another way to do it. Or sometimes for me, it's as simple as I got to unplug my headphones so that I'm using the right microphone on my phone, that kind of thing. But do a little playing around and use what you have and just get something out there. Publish early and iterate, I think is a good tactic. In terms of preparation, what I try to do is have a fairly set format for each of our series. So in the school year, we typically have a 20 to 30 minute conversation with our guests. And then all I do at the beginning and end of those, after we've recorded that conversation, I just hop on at the beginning of an episode, and I'm editing in Reaper or GarageBand or Audacity. Any of those will work fine. And I usually just add a little intro and maybe a reminder in the middle. I usually take a break in the middle of each episode and just say, here's one thing that's coming up, or we want to say thanks to this new grant that we got from this particular organization, and watch for that project coming up. And the reason that having the format helps me is that I don't have to do a lot of prep, because when I get to hear from there, I know the 3 questions that I'm always going to ask. What were your formative experiences? How has that affected your ministry now? And what would you tell a young person today to consider? That's kind of the format for that series, that show. For Uproar, the question is basically, how are you doing conspiracies of goodness in the world? How are you doing? And how can we, if anybody wants to partner with you, where do we find you? Try to keep those pretty concise, pretty predictable, and back end, it makes it a lot simpler. I don't have to do a whole lot of monologue about what's about to happen on this show, because people kind of know it and expect it. So that's kind of where I'm at with those things. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Any others?
What have you found that works well for your discussion? Really, what other ways do you build engagement with podcasts? I know I feel engaged with some podcasts I listen to, and so that conversation style works, but how do you follow up with your followers and kind of make those next steps in relationship?
Yeah, that's a good one. We have a couple of things that we've tried to be clear about. One, if somebody stops in and listens to one particular episode because they're interested in that particular guest, we tried to make the decision ahead of time that says, if that listener, because of our podcast, connects them to that guest, and they don't necessarily connect to Motor City Wesley, we're actually okay with that. We figure that the network that we're building of partners and interviewees and things like that will kind of be lifting all boats kind of situation, even if it doesn't increase the people that I would say are kind of regular attendees of Motor City Wesley. So it's one thing. But secondly, we do try to provide the things that will allow students themselves to be the agents of that kind of engagement. So that's where discussion guides and encouraging some of our student interns or similar leaders to host watch parties later of the live recordings, build a second layer of engagement. And the other thing is, we try to follow up in the work that we're doing to, it still is a thing that works to tell the world, well, we're all about. And so when we're sending out the mass email to the rest of the world, we try to build in those engagement pieces into those communications kind of. Still working on that though. I mean, you can send out a lot of podcasts, and to be quite honest, not a lot of people might listen. And even if they're listening, they might not be using it as a moment to really engage deeply. So I would say do some maybe do some experimentation on that, and see what works for your community. Just a second, y'all, and I can listen to the next question.
What's your frequency of broadcasts would you recommend? I mean, I know that a lot of times we will record ours like 3 or 4 or 5 and then just kind of string them out. So how do you recommend, what ways have you done it?
If there is another one. Yeah, I think the frequency is going to a little bit to be dependent on what you can do well, I would say. I would rather us, and we tend to not try to have once a week, every week, 52 weeks a year, right? We try to think of seasons. So I can usually do a fall semester season really well, and that might be pretty close to, but I'm not going to try to go over, winter break. I'm not going to try to go in the summer at that same frequency. So we take this kind of ebb and flow kind of tactic. And then there are some kind of conversations that, like in the summertime, are here from there stuff. That usually is once a month. It provides us the kind of consistency without a super high frequency, if that makes any sense. But depending on what you're doing, if you're having a 15-minute conversation where you feature one student every week, that might be something that's pretty easy to do in a very regular weekly fashion. If you're doing a lot of production or you're having a big conversation, that might be something you think more about once a month.
Yeah, Carl, you mentioned earlier the ex kind of formerly Christian individuals that are still into spirituality and they're a little edgy. So expand upon that a little bit more. And, I see a lot of intersectionality being something that could really juice up the interest in these conversations. I've been listening, of all things, to Sam Harris, the notorious atheist, who is also like really big into mindfulness. And I find his podcast to be fascinating. So, and that he's very much an intersectional thinker, has a lot to say to those who are somewhat spiritually minded. So you think that the intersectional approach?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I always say is there is so much to learn from people who have said no to the church, but they're usually the ones that have said no for all the right reasons, right? And so when we're listening to an episode of Who's Your God, and there's somebody on there that says, my perfect church would be, it's a lot of crystals and things, and that's because I was so frustrated that my United Methodist Youth Group didn't do anything that felt spiritually rich to me. You know what I mean? Right. Then that's a great place to start. That could be a really great starting conversation for things like, why doesn't church feel like something important, or it doesn't feel mysterious, or doesn't feel, what about those, we run into a lot of podcasts where folks went to church for a long time until they realized how corrupt the leaders of the church were. That's a pretty regular reason why people have given up on the church. And it gives us a great chance to say, yeah, what is wrong? Even if you're still in the church, how can you address issues of corruption on the part of leadership? But I think that there's always something to learn from those.
What about bringing in interviewing someone, let's say, that is in the church hierarchy, such as like our bishops or whatnot, and ask them why the church has abandoned the campus.
Yeah, that might be good, depending on the conversations that
No,
you
in a nice
have.
way. I mean, you wouldn't be that blunt, but you know what I'm saying. It would be. I think to kind of put the church hierarchy, you know, into a place where they have to consider the audiences that they're speaking to that normally don't hear from them.
Yeah, the only thing that I've heard students say at Wayne State University, they just don't care about a bishop in the church. Doesn't mean anything to them, right? And
Right.
so one of the things that I've learned in the process of putting podcasts together is that the guests that we invite and the ways that we ask the questions, I need to always think through the lens of someone for whom the church possibly could have zero meaning in their life. So if all I'm providing is, here's an with all due respect, but if all I'm providing is Chuck Knows Church for students of Wayne State University, I am making a big mistake because they don't care, right? they don't want to know what the narthex is. They'd love to talk about, oh, G's magazine has an issue on disobedience, and there's 10, 12 articles about people of faith who think that disobedience is sometimes really important for our impact in the world. Yeah, okay, I'll give you a minute of listen time. I'll look at your discussion questions about that. So and from that, then I think you can come back around to, so now that we've talked about that, how you what vision for the church would you have? How would you teach the church to be better, as you've learned from, you know, G's magazine or this other kind of mission agency? So the feedback loop for me is more about helping young adults speak into the life of the church rather than young adults to become better acquainted with the church. I hope I'm not getting in trouble, but
yeah,
you know what I mean?
No, I
Yeah.
totally get that. And I guess really sort of that was the direction I was going with it. I said, even though you would be interviewing a bishop and maybe putting him or her on the hot seat, it would allow them to learn from a demographic that they've given up on. Regardless of what that demographic thinks about them, it will help them make decisions in the future about their funding of our ministries, perhaps. Who knows?
I think that's right. Yeah. If you could do a meet the press version, you know, here are the 4 or 5 student panel, and they get to grill somebody from kind of within the church, and we can all see what that's like. I don't know. There's some you could do that. The one experience that we had on campus that I wish we could find a good podcast way to do, and maybe we will soon. We had a lot of success a couple of Lents ago, where during the 40 days of Lent, we were in the student center with a confessional booth. This is just totally ripped off from Donald Miller. And we just had a big banner that says, "We're sorry." And we said, everybody that passed by, we said, "We're sorry." And they would say, "What do you know?" And we would say, "Well, we're sorry for the ways that the church has hurt you. If you want to help us tell the church how we have hurt people," and you write it down in our little notebook, "we have some reparations for you," which is a $5 Starbucks card. I mean, it was all ridiculous, but you know, it was those kind of conversations that broke through some of the din of campus Christian life, which tends to be dominated in Detroit by a lot of, you know, 5-question quizzes that will tell you if you're going to hell or heaven, you know? And so we want to be providing the kind of conversations that people can listen to and engage with that help keep expanding kind of the vision of how the church needs to be on campus and with young adults.
Right.
Are there other favorite podcasts that people have found, particularly ones that you've been able to make these kind of bridges between whatever they're talking about and the theological missional life that you're trying to help produce amongst young people? And if we don't have one at the top of our heads, then I think that my encouragement is to find some. If there's something that you listen to just because you like it, and maybe that can be a way to gather, one small group that has that same kind of affinity. And even as just an entry point and relational tool, I think that there could be some real value in that. And then, we've had some feedback from the authors of other podcasts when we say, hey, we're doing a conversation guide on this recent episode. We usually have a couple of thumbs ups and, hey, do you want to join our Slack group? So that's the piece where your little podcast at your little campus ministry could become part of the overall kind of conversation, faith conversation happening in the podcast world. So, utilize your podcasts and that whole process to build relationships kind of in the church and beyond the church as well. And then I think you're doing podcasts the way that the professional podcasters do. It's not just something that we shovel out there for people to consume, but it's this grassroots conversation and exploration of the people that can really form communities, that can really create opportunities for people to gather. If there's any Adventure Zone fans out there, I mean, it's 3 silly guys from West Virginia and their dad doing Dungeons and Dragons, but they've got just tens of thousands of fans. And I don't know if we'll ever be the Adventure Zone, but certainly could be, if we're providing a regular enough and engaging enough stories and conversations, it certainly could be the thing that gets us our core kind of follower base here in Detroit, Michigan. And that's what we're trying to do. One last vision that I've got that I want to put to you all is this. The United Methodist Campus Ministry Association has a website. I know the communications guy, and I would be very interested if there were a big smorgasbord of podcasts that are locally produced, but that would be interesting to any and all persons involved in the United Methodist Campus Ministries. If there was a page on our site that helped people link out to those podcasts, that would be really something I'd be interested in setting up. It also might provide us, campus ministries wide, kind of the movement of United Methodist related campus ministries, a platform to attract folks that need to get the word out about upcoming young adult conferences or mission opportunities or whatever. And it might be a way that we can recreate a kind of resource sharing, mutually beneficial resource sharing in a church structure that is rapidly deteriorating. And I think it's really important for us to build these kind of things of inherent value that we're using locally, but then to stitch them together in a way that recreates a kind of connectionalism if our traditional connectionalism isn't working for us currently. If any of the things that I just said are interesting to you, let's stay in contact. And Carl at motorcitywesley.org is me, and I'll put some of that stuff also up in the archive of our conversation today. Are there any other questions that I can?
I want to share real quick. So I got connected with a podcast in June called Girl Trek's Black History Bootcamp. And it's been an initiative to help increase Black women to walk more so that their health is better. And after, in the midst of all the protests and stuff, they've put together these history conversations and encouragement conversations. And Corey, kind of to your question of, they record it while walking. And so it's a conversation between 2 women and they record while walking. So the sound quality isn't always excellent. But I've found the threads of encouragement for the day and also some spirituality that kind of lens through that, as well as empower the stories of history of some amazing Black women that are shared in that space, to be really, yeah, it builds me a sense of community. I know several of my friends that listen to it as well, and so it gives us a conversation starter. But I'm amazed that I'm always like, oh, I need to get moving, so I need to go out and walk, or I need to call someone when I'm walking, and build that community. So I think there's some really creative communities that are built around podcasts that if you explore a little bit about what's happening, you can kind of think, okay, how do I meet multiple needs of our students at this time? How do we help their mental health and their physical health and their spiritual health? And podcasts can do a lot of that.
I love that. And similarly, you know, I could imagine a campus ministry that had a nice worship gathering that can't do that in the same kind of way. But in the format of a podcast, you could definitely take audio from your various, you know, components of leadership for something like that, stitch them together in a thing that would show up on people's phones automatically every week. And just say, hey, you know, and then show up at your online small group and for these follow-up questions about that, you know, online kind of worship experience. I mean, I think the next step in our having to reevaluate is this idea that everything spiritually worthy has to happen live. And I know that might be a big hurdle to make, because it just feels weird to just kind of press play on something and have that be a real engaging experience. But I think we're going to have to, you know, at least in this time, figure out what that might look like. So think about those other, whether, you know, I love the idea of listening to a walking podcast and it helps you walk, right? And what if you could listen to a worship podcast and it would help worship, even though you have to do it somewhere else and at a different time. Thanks for that reflection.
I'd like to say that with the students of all different religious backgrounds and denominations, 3 of the students that are part of the Downtowners campus ministry are clearly, and from their very family backgrounds, Methodist, United Methodists. And they are helping me reach out. And I tell the story and they say, oh yeah, we forgot that, you know, of John and Charles on horseback, reaching out, and we're inspired by the sentiment that these leaders took to the gospel. So the spirit of our outreach with Methodists and Catholics and Presbyterians and Hindu and wonderful leaders, Jewish, we have to come together to feel the word. And I had used that soul felt. That's really what it comes out to. In our podcast, we don't do it quite that way yet, but we will. Right now is the Gospel of Mark. And the kind of the breviter et succincte way it's said, feel the word, get it out there, and let it soothe you. It's amazing how the students fall into that with my Methodist leaders. And I shared earlier that when I did the invocation and benediction of the Franklin University graduation, I had to call on Rob to help me write it because it was in the midst of the racial riots downtown Columbus. And he was filled with the spirit of the Methodist way he's been raised, and the level of practical outreach of faith. And so I thank you, Methodists. I'm a Roman Catholic. My grandmother was a Methodist. And I always felt my faith came from her because we used to sing How Great Thou Art when I'd sit next to her when I was 3 years old. But that there is something of a void and feeling level of students. And it's, do I dare feel this lament? Do I dare feel the faith I want so much to have? And my Methodist students are helping me answer that. I say thank you.
That's great. And, you know, taking that spirit of the earliest days of Methodism to say, well, first of all, let's show up on campus. That's great. Secondly, let's go wherever we need to go. And one of the places we need to go and keep figuring out how to go is kind of into this scary digital realm. Yes. I think podcast is one. I think the thing that it offers for me is that it's like a long form thing on the internet, right? It's not a 1 minute Instagram. It's a little bit of long form, and so you can do some things in 30 minutes that you can't do, you know, on a TikTok. And you probably could do well to do both of those things, but for now, this is a good way, kind of, for us to do a little bit of in-depth stuff. I do love, there was one podcast that I don't know if it's still going anymore that I was following for a minute, but it wasn't any kind of interview or news or storytelling. It was basically a Lectio Divina over top of some really like ambient electronic music. And it was great because it was a really specific kind of experience. So, you know, don't think that there is one appropriate format for your 30-minute, you know, recording. I think that you could do that a lot of different things. Do you have creative artists who are writing stories or writing music, or the whole kind of series of things that aren't just two talking heads on a bad Zoom call, you know? So be thinking about those things too, as we think about how are these experiences soulful, like you said, Ellen. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Carl. If there's not any other questions or comments,
Real quickly, then this is Chad. One of the podcasts that a friend of mine, we go back to high school, but he was one of our spiritual directors last year at Summer Institute, Todd Spencer. He's been doing a Lectio Divina podcast for several years now, kind of geared towards young adults, because he got started with this when he was the youth and young adult minister at the Methodist Church out in Colorado Springs. So anyway, I share that just might be one for people to check out if they were interested, because I'm really curious about this idea about doing worship by podcast, trying that this fall. I think that may be where we need to experiment. See what
That's
happens.
great, Julie. Thank you for that suggestion. And that's why I'd love to stay in contact with folks. If we're doing this experimentation, I think we could really help local churches. If we can point to the 2 or 3 campus ministries in each area that are using this kind of thing to help connect folks, maybe that is one thing that the campus ministry can go out and help local churches get set up to do the same with their congregations.
Well, James Baker, who started the first Wesley Foundation at the University of Illinois, that was kind of one of his things, that campus ministry should be the lab for the church, that it should be a place where we experiment, and that it's not imposing church practices and ways of doing things on campus ministry. It's campus ministry discovering the new ways that the church could be doing ministry in the community, in the broader community.
That's really cool.
It's supposed to be in our DNA. So,
in fact, you know, as we've tried to build, what are the engagement tiers for various levels of giving on the part of covenant partner churches to Motor City Wesley, we're taking a cue from the commission down in Georgia about a kind of, we work with a lot of students who have creative capacities. You know, they're in journalism, they're in the music program, they're graphic design, you know, all this kind of thing. So if you support us, they can support you and your witness to the world. And one of the suggested ways that we figure we could show up at a local church is to say, have you always wanted a podcast for your church? Let us send a student team to come set you up to do that. So it becomes this kind of resource that might have its own kind of value as well in terms of creating your mutual support across campus ministry and local church.
Cool.
If you haven't caught it, the Vanderbilt Wesley Foundation just launched their new podcast. That's the most recent one that I've heard about and seen. So check that out. It's a good student feature kind of conversation one. So you can look for Andy Wesley on, Apple Podcasts or whatever. You can catch Uproar is up on those too. That's ours. And Hear From There has a separate feed. And now we've decided that we're probably going to include that series in the Uproar feed as well. So if you want all of them, you can check that out. MotorCityWesley.org if you want to see what that looks like on our website. And that's kind of what I've been up to. Thank you for your time. Amy, are we about at the right time?
We're good. And I think we'll just release from here. I don't think we have to go back to the main session. So you're welcome to end your meeting. And be sure to join us back tonight. I forget what the thing is tonight, but join us back. Check your
Cultural
email.
competence with April Casperson.
I'm wrestling with this conference over multiple days and not in place.
I want to give a big shout out to Amy for her work and getting all this together, the whole team and everything. But I just am so glad. It's one of those moments, I think, where you've helped us kind of step into the void a little bit. So thank you, Amy, and encourage everybody to be thinking along the same lines. How can we, as people who work with very creative folks and innovative and passionate young people, how can we help the church step into this void bravely? So thank you.
Thank you all. Blessings.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
See you tonight.